Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us today in our first panel discussion on navigating remote learning. It's the first event as part of our Summer of Reskilling campaign. And this campaign is all about giving folks access to premium skills training from our amazing partners at Treehouse, General Assembly, and Udemy so they can transition into the tech industry. And if you haven't signed up yet, sign up at onramp.io to get started. We're accepting applications for some of the career paths until September 14th, and then the Treehouse one you can start anytime. We are excited to have teachers from Treehouse and General Assembly here, as well as a couple of other folks with really deep expertise in this area. I'm Maria Piper. I'm the Director of Programs at Onramp. And prior to this, I led remote training for Phase 0 at a company called Dev Bootcamp, which was one of the first boot camps for web developers in the Bay Area. And I am really excited to introduce our wonderful panelists. So first person we have today is Jason Serafica from General Assembly. Jason is a full stack software engineer and community organizer based in the San Francisco Bay Area. They have helped thousands of Bay Area residents learn web development fundamentals at weekly workshops and study groups in San Francisco's Mission and Soma districts, and helped kickstart hundreds of students' careers as an instructional associate for General Assembly's 13-week-long full stack software engineering immersive. As General Assembly switched to a remote-only learning format for instruction, they helped identify best practices for learners to communicate their needs to their supporters at home and General Assembly's staff by establishing personal boundaries and beneficial routines to maintain focus and motivation in a remote learning environment. We also have Kevin Solorio, who works at Red Squirrel and Dev Bootcamp. Kevin Solorio is a lead software engineer and consultant at Red Squirrel Technologies in Chicago, Illinois. Prior to Red Squirrel, Kevin was part of the Dev Bootcamp team working as an instructor in the Chicago campus, and he headed the curriculum team and eventually launched the San Diego campus. He's helped teach hundreds of students how to code and continues to find ways to mentor new developers in the field. He's definitely helped me in the past. And then we have Gail Hernandez from Treehouse. Gail is a senior software development instructor at Treehouse, which is an online technology school that aims to bring affordable technology and design education to everyone. He leads content creation for their full stack JavaScript and front-end web development curriculum. Gil is passionate about learning and empowering folks through technology education and mentorship. He lives in South Florida and enjoys speaking about learning and programming at local meetups and conferences across the US. And then lastly, we have Melvin Salvador. He's the head of product and growth at Career Karma, a Y Combinator-backed startup that helps people from non-traditional backgrounds find the right job training programs to help them break into careers in tech. Melvin graduated with a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Virginia 2 years ago, but pivoted into tech startups and credits the bulk of his learning from ad hoc online resources. Through this process, he's been able to land a lead role leading important initiatives at a fast-growing Silicon Valley tech company with no prior job experience, and now advises others on how they can do the same. And then we also have Lexi, Pierre, and Dana Breen from Onramp helping us with this panel. So I want to welcome them as well. So the first thing I wanted to bring up in this conversation is like, what started you off on deciding to work in the tech industry, and why do you think others should consider careers in this industry? Whoever wants to start can go.
I can go first. So my background in tech, I actually had a bachelor's degree in accounting, and I was working for a couple startups and really got into the tech side of things as I was starting to make friends with the developers and got to see what they were doing. And eventually I really wanted to kind of start my own thing. And so I was like, oh, how hard could this be? You know, these guys are coding all day long. It doesn't seem like it'd be that hard. So I jumped into it, a lot more difficult than I anticipated, but then I just ended up really falling in love with the continual learning and also all the problem solving that you end up doing, breaking things down into really small pieces. And from there, it just kind of escalated to where it just got to be more and more interesting to me. And eventually I joined a company where I was able to go full-time as a software developer. And then that led to me meeting a few people such as Dave Hoover, who was the one of the co-founders of Dev Bootcamp. And then I got recruited there and started teaching, and it's been fun ever since.
Oh, so I can go next. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and as tech became a large and larger part of the local economy, I witnessed and experienced firsthand the this massive amount of gentrification that happened in a lot of the neighborhoods I grew up in. And at the time, I was studying sociology, but I also took a programming class, and I realized how many skills that I had already transferred over. I like to analyze things. I like to break things down to solve puzzles. And so after I graduated from UC Davis, I went back to San Francisco and I started attending local tech meetups to learn about what is this industry, how can I get in, and what can I do if I don't have a CS degree or a formal background. And as I continued to go to these meetups, I learned a lot more about like what I can do to advocate for the communities that I call home, like being a queer person of color, being a Bay Area local, how can I get into this industry and advocate for my community? And that's really what led me here today. Now I'm teaching at General Assembly.
And then I guess I can go. So like Maria mentioned, I actually graduated with a mechanical engineering degree just 2 years ago. And what I ended up realizing even through my classes at university was I was working on problems that were a little older. It wasn't forward thinking as I wanted it to be. And I've always been really passionate about being able to build the future and you know, providing experiences and working on problems that really do impact and not just where we are today, but where we're heading. And so it was really important to me to really get my hands involved in a tech company so that I could really work on these ideas. And with mechanical engineering, a lot of those things are physical, and there's a lot of limitations with upfront capital. And if you have an idea, all of the logistics that go into that. But with software, it's a lot leaner. It's a lot easier to get an idea from just, you know, in your mind to actually out in the world and seeing whether or not it has value. So that was a really big driver for me. And ultimately, that's where everything is heading. All companies are going to end up being software companies in one way or another. Software will essentially be kind of a backbone of a lot of how businesses in the future operate. And I mean, we're all virtual right now, so that's a pretty big indicator of how important this really is.
Yeah, for me, it kind of worked out that way. I originally wanted to do something in film or television, and you know, I went to school for digital media and music. I played the trumpet. But yeah, during my time at school, I got really into designing websites and creating all sorts of fun and interesting projects. And even with this tool called Flash, if you're familiar with that back then. And yeah, it just provided some instant gratification, right? I could use art and a little bit of technology, and by yourself, like I was super introverted back then, I could pretty quickly design and build and publish some cool ideas that others can interact with. And yeah, I got my first job using the handful of projects I had created. And even then I didn't know hardly anything about coding and design, and I was terrified, thinking I was going to get fired every day. But I was learning a lot and gradually getting better and better. And I became really interested and passionate in front-end web development, design, and coding with web standards. So yeah, at work, I sort of became that go-to person for front-end, and that kind of kicked things off and led to a better opportunity at that job. And shortly after, a different job where I had to code more with .NET and PHP back then, and got to lead some teams. And while doing that, I found that even more rewarding than building and launching all these cool projects and software was learning and teaching others, right, what I was learning, and mentoring them, helping them get opportunities. So yeah, I saw that Treehouse was looking for an instructor. I reached out to them about it, and about 8 years later, here I am still doing it.
Thanks, Gil. Let's stick with you. And would you want to talk about what your biggest challenges were in getting started once you decided to start learning? And what solutions did you find?
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, I was able to really kick off my learning in school. So there were some accountability measures there, right? Learn the thing or you fail. But yeah, that learning carried over to my first job. And there I'd realized, surprised, what I learned in school wasn't all that relevant. So yeah, big hurdle. I sought out to learn all the things about coding and designing that could get me up to speed and ahead at work. So I think I struggled with keeping a consistent and efficient learning routine and staying organized. I remember staying up for hours and hours learning about one thing and then another. I was kind of all over the place and got burned out. So yeah, my hurdle was kind of forged by that misconception that I had to learn everything in order to stay relevant or just keep my job, or you're not good enough. It was paralyzing. So yeah, as far as solutions, I had to understand that one, nobody, no matter what they say, is going to know everything about a thing, about web development or programming. And learning effectively is strategic and deliberate. So it's a lifelong journey in many cases. So I focused. I was like, okay, I'm just getting started in my career, so I'm going to focus on a few specific things, learn those really well. I bought some great books and found some resources. And I sought out local meetups and conferences and kind of gathered up with a community of folks who had similar learning interests. And back then I thought that anyone who had a professional career as a developer, they just had to know everything, right? And in meeting other like-minded people, I realized, no, they don't, and that's okay. They don't have to. So yeah, that kind of helped change the course of things.
Who else then? What the biggest challenges you had in getting started once you decided to start learning? What have you faced?
Yeah, I can go. So one of the biggest challenges for me really was just finding the clarity in what direction I wanted to head into. Just like previously mentioned, there's a lot of resources out there, and sometimes it's really hard to filter which ones are the ones that you want to spend and dedicate and invest your time into to make sure that it's, getting to the outcome that you're looking for. And sometimes it's really hard to know that looking from the outside in. And so really just identifying what is the skill set that I'm after, what is the goal that I'm trying to achieve, and then what are the requisite steps that get me there, and then planning it just like strategically, just like Gail said. It's super important. And it wasn't really about the planning process. I think that you can find enough people and enough reviews online and just talking to people to really help with that. I think the number one thing most people kind of struggle with is that sense of clarity. It's like, okay, which direction? I know there's 1,000 doors that are currently open. My job is to close 999 of them. And many people want to keep their options open. And so they're kind of like fumbling all over the place. So I would say that.
That's really great. And then once people start to develop that clarity of like which door they're going to go through at this moment, there's still a ton of options, right? Like how do you decide what you're going to learn? So there's immersive boot camps, there's MOOCs. How do you find the best fit? I know Jason was really interested in talking about this.
Yeah, so this is a problem in particular that I find with a lot of people who ask me, like, where do I get started? I have all these resources. Which one do I know is the best fit for me? And what I really want to say to those people is that really first, get a piece of paper out and write down what your long-term goals are. Do you want to learn coding to become a web developer? Do you want to learn coding to work in DevOps or cloud infrastructure? Really think about what kind of roles you would see yourself pursuing after you learn these skills. And from there, look at all the options in front of you and start curating a collection that will take you to that goal. For example, if I had no knowledge of code and I want to learn about full stack web development, I look at, okay, let's go look at Treehouse. They have the tech degree program, or look at these cool Udemy coupons for these courses that a lot of my friends recommend. And then I can browse through all of their offerings. And the cool thing about a lot of our partners today is that they have a very huge library of content. So it's very easy to mix and match content to your own specific track. And from there, try it out for at least a month and see if you want to keep going. And I think that will really tell you which direction you need to keep going in.
I'd actually kind of like to piggyback off of that. That last point is super important too. I actually read this book by the name of it's called Designing Your Life. It's actually this elective at Stanford that a lot of the Stanford students really like because it actually applies design thinking principles from product design, from the design consultancies like IDEO and like Apple. They actually take the product design approach to designing your career. And one of the things that they really emphasize is not just burning the ships at the shore and just saying like, okay, like, let's do it. I'm totally going to go in on this software full immersion thing and not really understanding why it is that you're taking that step, when you can actually prototype it by getting someone on the phone and asking them, what exactly do they do on like a regular day basis? And does that resonate with me? And like, how can you get a prototype or just emulate that experience as closely as possible by job shadowing, an internship, whatever it might be, just to make sure that you have enough information that you're confidently taking that step forward.
And then once you are confident about taking that step forward and you've determined which kind of resources you want to use, one of the things that I always find really difficult is just holding myself accountable to myself. So what are some strategies that you have developed to hold yourself accountable? Kevin, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think one of my strongest areas is just like discipline and like day-to-day practice. Similar to learning a musical instrument, or if you're going to go after some type of sport, like you need to practice a lot of the same things every day. So as a teacher at Dev Bootcamp, some of the things that I would see is students would do a challenge or one of our coding exercises once and then move on. But the biggest thing is like making sure that that information sunk in. So like going back and revisiting it. And one of the things I would do with some of the students that were struggling through the program is I would sit down and pair with them and go step by step through the challenge and then delete the code and say, all right, now let's do it again. And then delete the code. Now let's do it again. Because it's that constant repetition, like what are you doing? And it helps take your ideas from like what it is that you're trying to accomplish into the actual coding language faster. And so you're trying to build that repetition, that muscle memory around getting like the thoughts in code into the editor. And so that way you just get that practice. And one of the things I found very successful was scheduling things. If you want to really prioritize something, put it on your calendar. So it became a normal thing for me as someone. I was working a full-time job. I wanted to get into coding. So pretty much my day would be come home, typically make something for dinner, go to the gym, then come back and do coding for an hour to an hour and a half, pretty much Monday through Thursday. I would take Friday nights off to go out with friends. Saturdays, I would usually do all my errands and whatnot. And then Sundays would be a lot more coding and that type of thing. But it was a very consistent routine that helped me pick up where I left off and just continue what I was learning.
Yeah, I was also going to suggest just that, creating a routine by scheduling your learning time, right? If you're serious about getting the most out of learning, I personally assign learning goals and tasks to dates. And there's tools you can use out there to keep track of tasks and goals, even Google Calendar and Docs and then Asana, for example. So yeah, what you do, you block up some calendar time and you respect that time. You treat it like an actual class that you signed up for and you have to be there, or like going to work, or maybe like your exercise routine, right? Make it consistent. Another thing we've seen students do at Treehouse in terms of accountability is have an accountability partner, right? Or be part of some accountability group. So you commit to learning something together, right? Whether it's to complete a stage in a course, a full course, part of a curriculum. So that helps you, your partner of the group, stay accountable, right? It's a motivator. Folks feel like they don't want to let others down by not following through or being perceived as irresponsible.
And then I would also add on to that it's a lot easier to hold yourself accountable to things that bring you energy. So in any way, shape, or form, if you're able to bring your learnings to something that you actually care about, that excites you, it's actually a magnetic attraction there. It's like you want to be doing these things, like you know what you're building towards. And a lot of people really get it a little messed up in terms of they think that finding your passion is some sort of archaeological dig, but really it is an architectural build. So you have to input energy into the system in order to make sure that this wonderful house that you're building has a really strong foundation, and that you're actually excited that with each like learning opportunity that it's heading or pushing you towards the right direction. And the more that you can, one, tell that to yourself, and kind of obviously that's like self-accountability, but sharing that with the world, with your friends, loved ones, not only does that reinforce the fact that, oh, now I'm on the hook because everybody else in my circle knows that I've, declared that this is a goal that I want to see, I want to make sure that I don't let them down, but also I want to make sure that I don't let myself down.
I think some other things too, there's Atomic Habits. I think it's James Clear that's the author of that one. And then there's another book that's called Indistractable. They kind of go hand in hand with like building these habits and ways to like build a system around the habits, and not just like, oh, I want to do this daily, but finding hooks throughout your daily life of how you can make this happen and just commit to it. And that idea that you don't have to, go from here to the moon in one shot. There's a series of steps, and making sure that you take a little bit at a time. And I think one of the things from Atomic Habits, like you want to try to get like 1% better every day. If you get 1% better today and then 1% better on that, it just constantly compounds. And so it towards, after a year, it's going to be significant.
Yeah, that's actually another huge point there. A lot of people, because they have the best intentions in the world, they want to make sure that they, do everything that they can to conquer their goals and their dreams. But sometimes they bite off a little bit more than they can chew. So it's really important to, for example, if working out is like one of your goals, or, dedicating X amount of time to complete this course, don't try to start out with like an 8-hour sprint of just sitting in front of your screen and trying to like crank through this, or, putting in a 2-hour long, really intense workout. Maybe try with like 5 minutes, just lift a couple of weights or just sit down 10 minutes. And if you can knock that off, that'll show you a little bit of, progression, and you'll be able to feel good about the fact that you're, saying the things that you said you were going to say that you were going to do.
Yeah, that's all really excellent. I think one of the other things that's really difficult when you're deciding what kinds of materials you want to interact with is like setting yourself up for success in terms of how you learn. So I've found in my journey that a lot of people kind of assume that everyone can learn to code by reading documentation or reading blog posts or this and that. Obviously, Treehouse saw that this was wrong because one of the first things they did was build a lot of videos for people. So what are some thoughts you all have, and we'll start with Jason, on how to manage learning differences, especially in a remote environment that we're all in now?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about accountability towards other people, but it also goes back to you as well. Like, you should also reach out to people if you have accessibility needs. For example, it might be helpful for online learning platforms to have captioning if you process audio differently. Another thing to reach out is maybe you have something about your vision and you want to ask around, like, how can I modify my code editor to make things more visually accessible for me as well? I think it's really important that you have to reach out with your needs to the people who are able to help you make an environment that works best for you. I think that conversation needs to happen a lot more.
Yeah, I think with the synchronous real-time learning style of online learning, you maybe have to be a little understanding of the fact that not everyone is at the same level. And you can tweak your curriculum and your instruction based on the range of students, and you can do that per classroom and per cohort even. But yeah, like at Treehouse, we assume from the start that students are at the same learning level, at the beginner level, never written a line of code in their life, for example. So keeping accessibility top of mind, right? We have squads dedicated to making sure content is as accessible as it can be. But yeah, along with that, we work really hard to make that on-ramp sort of gradual enough to bring everyone on with a mixture of video instruction, written material, code challenges, projects, and lots of practice opportunities. We also encourage students who are further along in the curriculum to participate in code reviews and project reviews and be our Slack champions and community moderators, which all play a huge role in the overall learning experience.
I think it's also good to understand, like what Jason was saying, understanding your own needs, but also a few ways to help with that is like really mastering Google. Like if you're if you're a visual learner, like understanding how to maybe do better and more refined image searches to look what you're going for, or leveraging searches on YouTube more, just finding a way that's going to give you the information that you need a lot more, and not being afraid to ask. Like you need to be your own advocate in a lot of places, because some people If they witness you struggling, they may see what they can do to help, but in a remote environment, that ability as an instructor to see you struggle is a lot more difficult. So you might need to be a lot more forward with what it is that you need.
That's great. And continuing on that frame, one of the things I've seen students struggle with, and I'm guessing you all have seen this as well, is just how do you do a good Google search? Like when people start off, oftentimes they'll be like, oh, here's the entire error message that I have, including all my local variables, and they stick it in Google search and they don't get anything back. So what tips do you have for people who don't have that muscle yet to get started on improving their searching capabilities?
So before you start searching, let's see what the computer is yelling at us about. Often the readout is very long and it might include line numbers and the kind of error that you are looking for. So it's best to focus on the line number and then look in your code where it's saying to look. And then from there, you can figure out what's going on in your code and then try to find out what kind of error you are facing.
Also learning how to do the filters. It was hilarious when Apple first released the Swift programming language. We had some students at Dev Bootcamp that decided to do their final projects using iOS and Swift, and it was a brand new thing. So a majority of the search results would come back with references to Taylor Swift. And it was like, that is not at all what we're going for. And so understanding how to like negate that from the results was something that they quickly picked up on to start looking for things that were relevant to coding.
And I'll actually add something that's a little less technical. In terms of just learning things in general, one thing that really helps, so Google is just a massive, massive highway for the internet. Everyone goes to Google for their searches. And a lot of the times those first and second, third results are like really good. However, it's not necessarily the most optimal resource for you. What actually is really helpful for filtering really high quality resources is people. So if you can identify people that can consistently point you in the right direction towards the right resources, you might uncover things that you might not find through a Google query. It's really like having conversations with people, knowing where they're at, and then identifying the areas where you can kind of start exploring to really get these high quality resources that you're looking for.
Yeah, I would say Google's my biggest cheat sheet when it comes to, error debugging. But yeah, in terms of resources from people, 100%, identify folks and follow people who write, speak about, and teach what you're learning, or who are working on the types of roles that you're working towards obtaining. And from experience, you'll find super valuable resources that way. For what it's worth, Twitter, I've made it a pretty good curated stream of resources, and LinkedIn is becoming more in that for me as well. There's some great newsletters out there from super talented folks. And that's one of the benefits of social and collaborative learning. You can ask your colleagues, share learning goals, study tips, and resources. And then find a good app for saving and managing those resources. I tend to use tools like Pocket and Instapaper, even Google Docs in the past have worked for me.
And so what do you do, or what do you suggest people do when they're super excited, they're like in a learning program, and they hit that first seemingly like impossible wall, right? They feel like they can't pass it. It's starting to demotivate them a little bit. What are your suggestions for people at that step? Because most of us, I'm guessing, will hit it at some point in our lives, at least once.
One of my biggest things is step away from the keyboard, go for a walk, clear your head, because oftentimes when you are really in the thick of your problem solving, you have excluded a lot of possible solutions because you've gone so far down one path. And then sometimes if you just take a step back, you might see that there is another solution. You might see something else. Rubber ducking is also very popular. Like, just try to explain this to someone. It could be literally anybody. They don't need to know the answer, but typically when you begin to effectively brief someone on the problem, you start by expressing what the problem is, and then you typically start backtracking the things that you have done. And it's typically in that process you do uncover one of your errors. And then you can say like, actually, you know what? Never mind, I got this. And then go back to it. But I think one of the things is there's a little bit, you're going to end up losing a lot of time if you just continue to just stare at the keyboard and try to figure this out. Like, you need to step away, give yourself some breathing room.
Any other ideas?
So on top of stepping away from the keyboard, I feel like you should also celebrate, because that means that you're really learning and growing if you're struggling. When you hit that roadblock, that means you learned enough to get to a point where you're now where you don't know where to go from here, which is good. That means that you're capable of going beyond what you thought you could do.
Yeah, I would say that with a lot of endeavors that you're trying to acquire a skill set, you're going to inevitably come to a point of friction where it's hard and you're failing, but that's always good if you're adopting a growth mindset. So you can actually think of yourself kind of like a machine learning algorithm. So any failure is actually a really rich data stream of information to just help you make a better decision in the future. And so you just keep collecting data. So every time that you hit enter and you're having errors on your screen or whatever it might be, this is just another way that you're doing it wrong. So you just collect that information and then you move forward. And each failure that comes to you really is just helping you get better and better over time.
Yeah, and one last thing, when it comes to learning specifically, space your learning out, right? Your brain can't maintain its efficiency if you're doing like an hour long, a 2 hour long learning period, as Kevin mentioned, without a break. So plan that into your learning schedule after you achieve a milestone or while you're still feeling good and not about to burn out. Take a break, let your mind sort of kind of internalize and you can let everything sort of sink in and then come back refreshed and ready to learn more or continue tackling your work.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that I think has really helped students I've seen when they hit a roadblock is talking to other people who are also learning or in their community. But building a community in a remote setting is actually incredibly challenging, having done that for a few years. So I want to hear from you all on what you've seen work when it comes to building connection and a community in a remote setting that people can leverage for support, not just technical support, but also just help with their learning journeys. Jason, do you want to get started first?
Yeah, so Dev Twitter is definitely a thing. And if you come from a marginalized identity, it's very helpful to hop on Dev Twitter and see what people are trying to call in the tech industry. Unfortunately, there are many places in tech right now where a lot of identities are not even respected, or many people don't even feel safe. So it's important to find those people and connect with them. They're great sources of advice on how to represent yourself fully in this industry. And being able to find mentorship has been exceptionally valuable. And it's not just on Twitter. There's lots of other platforms to find other people in tech who might have the same struggles that you have faced.
Melvin, were you going to jump in earlier?
No, I think I'll let someone else go. I feel like I've been rambling a little bit over here.
I can go. I think when you're learning something new, there's times when you're going to feel uncomfortable, right? When it's new and complex. So yeah, if, learning remotely can feel isolating and more daunting, especially if you start to feel stuck, right? You feel the sense of being lost, and no real-time interaction can really affect your engagement in what you're doing. And that often leads to giving up. So I've always suggested, all right, well, while you're learning, remotely asynchronous, just try to find a synchronous cohort, right? If you're part of a remote boot camp or a learning platform that's 100% asynchronous, or a massive open online course, it's probably going to be hundreds of people, right, learning the same thing that you're learning. And those schools and those platforms usually have a community built around it, right, by way of a forum or Slack or Zoom gathering. So, if you are feeling stuck or unproductive by joining these, and I think by building connections, you're going to find out that, yeah, other people are kind of feeling like I am. They're having the same kind of questions, the same hurdles. And what I've noticed is that a lot of the students that have just been through some of those things, they reach out to other folks, right, who are struggling with that and provide help to others to get them unstuck, and then they pay it forward to other students. So yeah, community or social learning is wonderful in a remote setting. It provides support and accountability, and yeah, you just keep each other on track.
I guess I could also add Career Karma as a platform is actually really helpful for this too, because it's kind of like a platform for not just one particular bootcamp, but a bunch of different bootcamps as well. You'll find and come across folks that are learning either self-taught, they're just trying to ultimately break into careers in tech, and they're all acquiring skills just like everyone else. There's a lot of learnings that some people can go through that you can learn from someone else's experiences. You don't necessarily have to make those mistakes yourself. It's always really great to have as many people like on your team, and by sharing your story, letting people know what you're about, there's a lot of people that will actually it's a little bit surprising sometimes to just see how willing people are to help, just because they know like what you're all about and like where you're trying to go.
Also, I think it was Jason that said earlier about celebrating your wins. I think one of the things that you can do is kind of celebrate that win and also give it forward. So if you're part of an online community, look for the people that are in the path that you just went through. So as an example, I recently went through a course online, and as I progressed in the course, I started hanging out in the chats for the parts that were right behind where I just finished, and was helping people with the things that I had just gotten stuck with myself and giving that. And it was interesting, there were several people that just started reaching out, and we just kind of formed a small group of working through some of these problems, because you can tell everyone was open to sharing information. There was no like competition between us. We were all trying to learn. And so helping each other with that step and reaching back, you just learned this thing, now you can pay it forward. And it also helps solidify what you just learned.
Yeah, absolutely massive. I think, at its core, it's like really finding people that have seen success in the exact thing that it is that you want to accomplish, but also getting alternative views as well, because sometimes their solution might not necessarily be the exact way that you need to go about doing so, but just informing yourself from like different angles will always help you make that better informed decision.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. One of the things I want to also talk about, especially when you're learning remotely and you're holding yourself accountable, how are you sure that you've learned something, right? Like you were just mentioning, Melvin, that someone else might have a kind of a different way of going about something or a different solution. That could be a way of like, can you read the code? Can you understand what they're doing? Like, that could be a way of determining whether you've learned something. But what do you all suggest for making sure, like measuring your own success in your learning?
Yeah, how comfortable are you in a panel with a bunch of people in public and being able to just share it? It's teaching people if you're able to just, get something that's super complex, and finding even analogies are really great. I think analogies are extraordinarily helpful for people that, sorry, I had something going off on the side. Analogies are extraordinarily helpful in helping simplify extremely like complex things. And that actually helps you make it a little bit more digestible for whoever it is that you're trying to teach. If you're able to just take something that's so complex and make it a little bit more digestible, and you're clearly able to articulate the concepts, the underlying root of like what it is that you're trying to teach, that's a good signal that you have a little bit of expertise into that you've learned this to a certain extent. So being able to teach people is actually massive.
Yeah, 100%. Well said. I think it's super helpful to engage in active learning versus just taking everything in at face value as passive learning, and you start to form your own interpretation of what was taught. So yeah, usually when I learn something, I step away, right, and then think about it. I even write down the main concepts and key ideas in my own words, and like you're talking to a friend, like rubber duck debugging, as Kevin mentioned. And then later, while referring to your notes and resources, because you're not going to remember everything, you might start to apply those concepts in some way. And I think that's way more effective than going back and rewatching something or rereading a chapter over and over again until you think you understand it. And if you not only do that, but also start to draw connections between what you learn and what you may have learned previously or what you might already know about something, I think that's a sign that you've successfully encoded that information and you can more effectively maintain it in memory. So yeah.
I think for like stuff like algorithms, one way is like doing it in a language that you don't know, because do you really understand what the algorithm's doing? Because it's really just a different, you're trying to follow a certain set of steps and the language is just how you implement it. But if you really understand like what those steps are doing and how to internalize them, then the language just becomes like a small obstacle of like, how do I do this in this language? Oh, this is how I do it. But the algorithm is there. The algorithm's stuck. The actual process for doing it is internalized at that point.
Yeah, there's something to say about applying what you're currently learning to a different context to really and give you the confidence that you actually understand what you're learning. And one of those ways is teaching people. Another way is to apply those things that you're learning into just a different problem set that is maybe tangentially related or not related whatsoever. But if you're able to take these things and apply it and actually solve problems and build things and be able to teach people about your thought process, about how you went about solving this problem, those are also really good indicators that you've been able to master it to a certain extent.
One of the things that I think really helps people, especially in a collaborative or more boot camp environment, is to pause in between the mountains of work that you have to do and explain what you've learned to someone else. And especially if you're having trouble explaining what you think you've learned or taking the time to write it down will allow you to explain it to a teacher. And I've actually found that when I thought I learned something and I then explained it, I was like, my teacher was like, oh, actually, that was not what that thing is. But if I hadn't written it down, I wouldn't have known what I had thought I'd learned before. So there's like two things here. One is taking a break and making sure that you're like telling someone, communicating to someone else what you're learning. And two, like getting a sanity check or like some check on whether that's actually correct. Because otherwise we think we learned something and we actually don't learn it properly. So I think that's really important. And so one of the other things that people are definitely going to be facing a lot more in remote learning, and especially with COVID, where you can't distract yourself with fun things like going out to eat or going to the movies, it's really hard to like log off of your computer for the day or like feel like you shouldn't be working. How have you found the best ways to establish boundaries from whether it's like working and learning when you're at home? Jason, do you want to take a stab at this?
Yeah, so if you're able to, having a dedicated workspace that is only for work is immensely helpful, and letting everyone else in the household know that this is your space and this is where you will be working.
Yeah, totally. A dedicated learning space. I think anywhere where you can avoid distractions and that you don't use for other things like cooking and being on the couch and learning might seem comfortable, but it's not going to be effective in learning. I think while you need to make your space comfortable, for example, ergonomics play a key role. If you well-lit space, natural light, that it's quite organized with good seating, that's all going to maximize your concentration so you can focus for the time you're studying, and then later on be sure to take breaks and schedule those in your learning. So otherwise it's going to be really easy to get into procrastination mode and lose motivation. So yeah, breaks help you stay refreshed and ready to absorb new information. And
I would say to also outline very clear, strict boundaries in terms of time. There's like this notion of I'm an essay that's due in 3 weeks, you're going to do it in 3 weeks. But if I tell you to do tomorrow, you'll figure out some way, shape or form, how to cram it all in one night. And the interesting thing with it is that you can actually give yourself that free time at the end of the day as a reward for yourself for actually putting in the work. Because otherwise, if you don't have really strict times of like, this is, for X amount of time, I'm going to be working, I'm going to be really focused, and then I can enjoy the rest of my day after, that period of time. And then, yeah, as far as like setting up your workspace, it's really helpful too. It's just psychologically, you want to give your body, your brain context switching. So this is chill time versus like, this is time to really, get into the weeds of things. And that also works with time of day as well. So figure out which times of day you really, peak high energy, you really want to focus and do that deep work. And just ultimately, like, to also balance in making sure that you're effective in the time allotted that you've given yourself to do work. You want to take care of yourself. And so making sure that you're going outside and getting some sunlight. I know that I've been, kind of struggling on that end sometimes myself. It's, like you can see the sun from like the window back here, but it's different when you can actually feel the sun on your skin. And just for 10 minutes, literally just give yourself 10 minutes, just walk outside, just refresh, and actually helps a lot with productivity in terms of that as well. So definitely make sure you're working out and like eating right. You want to, develop the energy that you need to really make this thing sustainable long term.
One thing that I've gotten better at, especially since having children, is just knowing what time I log on and what time I log off, and telling people, hey, outside of those times, like, you're not going to reach me for work unless it's an emergency. If it's an absolute emergency, you can call me. But other than that, like, don't expect me to be online. And just making sure that I have a very clear start and a stop for something is really helpful, because then I'm holding myself accountable to that. And I'm not getting called in at, like 6:15 for something that's going to take another 30 minutes. So if you're working and you're trying to also learn on the side, like making sure that you're communicating to others about when you're done for the day, and is like one of the most important things, I think. But that said, one of the other things that I've found really hard is that some days I just have meetings all day. And then when I'm done with meetings, I have no energy for anything else. I just want to crash. And so I think we're all also dealing with remote meeting fatigue, which will definitely be the case for people who are doing remote boot camps or, learning remotely and involved in synchronous meetings. So what are all of your thoughts on like how to combat the remote meeting fatigue that people may feel and try to learn?
So one strategy that I found super helpful is, because it's really draining to see like a grid of boxes with everyone's faces. If you have very large groups, it's very hard to identify who's speaking sometimes. So what I find super helpful is creating a Google Doc and sharing it with the group. That way you all have a collaborative notepad that everyone can write on, and you can all edit together in real time. So you can have people writing questions and having them answered on the next line. And everyone's really writing down what they think is going on, so it's easy to correct at the same time. But having that sheet open on like a shared screen is very helpful. That way you can see everyone's thoughts at once without having to see everyone in a little box.
I would say if you could sub out any meetings where you don't necessarily have to have your camera on, you can just turn on that audio and take it portably and just walk around outside. Just sneak one meeting in just to re-energize you and get those things, get the blood flowing.
Yeah, I'd offer a different perspective. I think if a meeting doesn't have a clear agenda or goals or commitments to focus on, then maybe it's not worth having. And if you can communicate that to the right person, also certain meetings probably don't need to happen every day or every week. So you can opt for bi-weekly meetings. Maybe once a week you could do something asynchronously on Slack, and then the week after a proper meeting. But if you don't have a lot of control over that, and it's a meeting that you just have to attend frequently, and you just be honest about it in some ways, right? If you feel like, hey, maybe in meeting A or meeting B this week, I don't think I could be a meaningful contributor because I'm so consumed by learning and other commitments, I think people will understand. But yeah, other things you can do in meetings that you're in, icebreakers, right? Where you do breakout sessions in Zooms. We've done those at Treehouse, and they make things super interesting and fun. And, keep folks engaged with the reaction feature in Zoom and the chat feature. All those things can help, keep you engaged and avoid that fatigue.
If you can identify like what about it is draining, like is it the fact that you're just sitting there all day and you just need to stretch your legs and do some type of walking around? So that might mean one solution would be to try to give yourself adequate time between meetings so that you can go do that. If it's the structure of the meeting, bringing that up as something to the managers or the facilitators of the meeting, because sometimes like the meetings that drive me nuts are the ones where they're very discussion oriented and not very like, this is what we're going to get out of this meeting. Because at the end of the meeting, if like we've changed nothing and we've discussed this for like 45 minutes, like, okay, that's fine. Like we could have done some of this asynchronously. So being willing to propose different ways to getting the outcomes of the meeting. So if you've really identified what the meeting is about, maybe you can start showing different ways of doing it in asynchronous fashion, which is something that, you know, remote working is really a great tool for. But if there's meetings that you really do need to be synchronous on and get together at that time, having a very clear structure of what's going on, what are we going to get out of this, and also limiting who's there to just the people that really need to be there, because there's too many meetings that just have everybody just in case that they need to hear some of this information. And then it just gets like you know, like all the conversations end up sidetracking what you're actually trying to do.
Yeah, great. This is such a weird time with everything being remote. Unless you work remotely 100% of the time, I'm sure it's quite a bit of a transition for a lot of folks. I personally didn't realize how much anxiety some people have about being on camera all day. So the idea of like not being on camera is a really good one if you can get away with it. So that's an excellent suggestion, as well as all of the other ones you mentioned. So as we get to almost our Q&A section, which I want to encourage people to write any questions you have in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll get to those in a second, but I want to ask each of you, what is the biggest mistake you've made or seen others make, and what piece of advice would you give people who are new to the tech industry? Kevin, would you mind starting?
Sure. I think one of the areas I struggled with the most early on in just like software development is fear of being wrong. And so I wouldn't do anything at all. And it would be a point where you're just staring at an editor and the cursor's just blinking at you. And I think it's really important to realize that the first thing you type is going to be wrong, and that's okay. It's just a starting point. It's a first draft, and that you're going to iterate on it. And it's not going to be perfect, and it's easy to change. You just hit backspace a few times and type something else or do whatever. But being intimidated and almost like anxious about doing it right the first time. I think it's important to realize, just like writing a paper or writing a book or writing anything, you're going to go through a series of drafts. And the first thing you do will change over time, and that's totally fine.
Jason, would you like to go next?
Sure. So one of the biggest mistakes that I and many other people I've seen learn how to code, one of their biggest mistakes is that they always compare themselves to someone else. Learning itself should not be a competition, even though this industry is highly competitive. I find it helpful to not compare yourself to like those people who study code in a month and apply to FANG and get like a 6-figure salary immediately. Your journey is your own, and you really should own it.
Thank you. Guil, would you like to go next?
Yeah, agree with Jason and Kevin. I think I've broken and accidentally deleted a few code bases in my days in development and production even. But keeping with learning specifically, I think what I see is folks falling into this passive learning trap. So, you know, they'll spend hours and hours learning, but then later they can't recall or retrieve or apply anything in some way. So yeah, a piece of advice would be, if you know, learn actively and deliberately. Otherwise, you're going to be doing a major disservice and not achieve your learning goals. And yeah, don't worry about learning everything about a subject and rely on the resources. And you know, once you develop good learning habits, keep it going. You know, have a growth mindset. You know, it's a must really if you want to stay up to date in technology, and share what you know. You're always going to know one or bunch of things that someone else doesn't know. So yeah, share it, embrace that there's things that you don't know, and that's fine. You know, it's going to keep you engaged and motivated and learning.
Thank you. Melvin?
For sure. So I think it was Kevin. I would actually give the same advice, except applied a little bit more generally in terms of just things that you want to pursue. A lot of people will have some sort of anxiety in terms of picking the wrong path or doing the wrong things, that they actually don't move. And what ends up happening is time is your most valuable resource. You never get that back. And if you make a wrong move, if you mistake or like a failure, that's actually a lot better than not doing anything at all. And a lot of people can get caught up with like not moving, hesitating, and then just losing time and not learning anything from that. So just make the move, like decide. It's okay to be wrong. Like just decide. You'll learn whether or not it's the right path that you're going down, whether it's something like a skill set that you're trying to acquire or something that you're learning. Just decide that this is the one thing that I want to be focusing on. Because if you're going a million miles in all sorts of different directions, you're actually making marginal progress in any direction. So definitely just have clarity and focus in terms of that. And then I would say that what's super helpful to supercharge your acceleration, your propulsion into like the goals that you're trying to see, is by surrounding yourself with the people and ideas that'll move you towards your goals. And so whether it's people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis on Zoom or call, or people that are around you, or even just books, podcasts, people that you follow, seek wisdom from those people that have seen success in the things that you want to accomplish. And then always do and believe that which moves you towards your goals. And that's basically my gist.
Thank you. So with that, let's go into the Q&A section, and Lexi is going to come on camera and she's going to help us through that. I think right now we have one question, so we should definitely be able to answer that, and maybe we'll get one or two more.
Hey everyone, I'm Lexi, and I'm gonna help facilitate the Q&A. So it looks like we do have a question from James, and he asks, how do you keep yourself motivated to stop procrastinating on your learning journey and just get started? And I know that's something a lot of people struggle with. I know I struggle with this, so I'd be really interested to hear everybody's responses.
So with procrastination, usually I identify there's some underlying issue about that lack of motivation. For example, you might feel like you might get bored if you sit through a lesson, for example, or you find it hard to focus when you need to. You really have to think about what kind of environment am I working in, and why do I find this activity boring? And a way to counteract that is think about, if I do this, how will I get closer to my goal? Or for example, I can't sit through this 25-minute lesson if I split it up into 10 minutes instead. Think about small actions you can take to address what that procrastination is coming from.
I think there's a little bit of stasis too, where you just like, if you're not doing anything, it's easy to continue not doing anything. And there's always a point for me. I know on days where I'm having a hard time focusing or a hard time getting anything going, there's a Pomodoro technique that I've used before, which is just like set a timer for 25 minutes. That is like, okay, for 25 minutes, I'm gonna focus on this one thing. And then you really identify like a specific thing you'd like to do in that 25 minutes, and you start going down that path and you start getting some momentum. At the end of the 25 minutes, you can take a 5-minute break. So get up, stretch, and then set yourself up for another one. And I found that that's a really good tool for any of those days that you're just having a hard time getting started.
Yeah, and then I would also add to that, it kind of goes back into the earlier point that I made about a passion really isn't something that you just find and stumble upon. It's something that you build. It's kind of like love. It's quite interesting. So if you're having like friction, mental friction, in terms of doing something that's moving you towards your goal, and you're like, oh, I don't want to do it, that might be an indicator that this isn't the right path for you. And you really do have to just, take a step back and analyze whether or not these are the actions that I want to be taking that'll move me in the direction that I want to go into. And so that will require turning wants into needs, and really just investing the energy and developing that passion, and just like reminding yourself why it is that you're doing what you're doing, what the ultimate end goal like is, and like ultimately like it should excite you. And if it's inherently exciting, it really does remove a lot of that mental friction.
Yeah, distractions can also get you into procrastination. And I know for me, I'm super distracted. So I minimize and avoid any kind of distraction. And really good suggestion by Kevin, the Pomodoro technique, because I think I learn and work better in these short, intense bursts of 25 to 30 minute spans, right? So I've used that effectively. And yeah, scheduling distractions, right? After you hit a milestone, then you go out and walk your dog, play with your dog, or do something that you enjoy, reward yourself, right? Or reflect on, like, gosh, I really learned a lot. I've come a long way. So, if you're feeling down, I think reflection is important, and journaling. But yeah, I think Pomodoro technique is my go-to on days where I'm just like, all right, I need to focus.
Yeah, that's a great point. Looks like we don't really have any other Q&A questions. I encourage you all to keep adding questions if any come up. Maria, did you have any additional questions?
Yeah, I just want to encourage everyone, if you do have questions, I think you can reach out to us at Onramp. Our email is support@onramp.io, and we could also forward it to anyone if they're willing to answer, or we can give you our perspective. And I do want to do a quick second to plug Career Karma's Reskill America campaign. So Melvin, do you want to give a quick spiel on that before we go? I know we're 2 minutes over.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the people that come to Career Karma, like Maria mentioned at the start of the call, really is a platform to help people get the right resources, support, mentorship that they need to make the right career decisions for them. So if you're considering going through boot camps or just teaching yourself how to code, ultimately we want to help enable you in that process. And we've actually come across a lot of folks that are not able to pursue these learning opportunities because they don't have the equipment necessary. And by that, I mean they don't have the laptops to actually log on and learn how to code or data science or design or whatever it might be. And we want to make sure that everyone has the same access to equal opportunity. So we want to gift laptops to anyone that might need them. So if you're coming from an underserved background, you've been impacted by COVID, and you are trying to enroll into a job training program or a coding boot camp, definitely apply for the Reskill America campaign. And I can drop that application link here. But we want to make sure that everyone has that equal access to opportunity. So don't worry if the laptop should not be a hindrance on your education. So we definitely want to help with that.
Thank you so much for all of the panelists who've come and given us their insight today. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank all of the people who've come to listen to us. Have a great day and happy learning.